The work of manga artist Katsuhiro Otomo was one of the most popular mainstays of the 80s anime and manga boom. That time when the West was first starting to really understand the potential behind the storytelling offered by the mediums of Japanese anime and manga. Otomo's most popular work to reach the West was no doubt the anime adaptation of his most popular manga, Akira, a sci-fi action classic that confronted various societal issues within Japan at the time it was written, such as government corruption and the sidelining and rebellion of young people, all within one of the first examples of a futuristic cyberpunk setting. It has been years since we first heard rumblings of a live-action adaptation in the works, and, to no surprise, it still hasn't happened yet. But there is another project out there associated with Mr. Otomo that I've always been interested in, and which I've always been surprised at how little attention has been paid over the years. You see, there was a time when Katsuhiro Otomo was involved with a survival horror game. It was called Fakedown. System Sacom, the developers behind Mansion of Hidden Souls and Deep Fear, started work on the game somewhere in the mid-90s, at first targeting a spring 1997 release. Fakedown was being developed for the Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn magazine covered the game throughout its development cycle, and much mention is made of Otomo's involvement. I'm not quite sure if Mr. Otomo only served as the character and visual designer, or if he had a bigger creative input over the game's development. But I can easily imagine Fakedown as being his type of story. Fakedown takes place in the year 2050 as the result of events that took place in the now past 2020. Similar to what actually happened in real life, a virus was released. In the game's world, this virus, called the Fakedown virus, corrupted human DNA and turned humans into monsters, called Fakers. These Fakers set out to kill all life on Earth, absorbing the DNA of the people and the animals that were killed, in order to further their evolution, resulting in Fakers that look similar to a variety of wildlife, such as giant baboons, and even dinosaurs. In response, mankind developed killers, young girls infected with the virus, basically Fakers themselves. They were sent off to dispose of the Fakers. After the end of this cleanup operation, no longer useful, and possibly more dangerous than the original Fakers, the last of the killers was sent to the moon by rocket. This rocket, loaded with atomic weaponry, exploded when it reached the moon, and a meteorite covered with a large amount of the Fakedown virus landed on Earth, inciting another pandemic that led to most of the human race being destroyed, the few that were left retreating to underground shelters. Our main character is a young boy named Dayon, another artificial Faker developed as a last-ditch effort at saving the human race. Like the original killers, Dayon's job is to destroy Fakers. And like the original Fakers, when Dayon kills an enemy, he absorbs its DNA in order to help his own physical evolution and become stronger. In terms of gameplay and overall presentation, Fakedown was to be one of the many Resident Evil clones that were popular in the 90s, making use of a fixed camera system and pre-rendered backgrounds. Judging from what little footage has been released, along with the screenshots in the Sega Saturn magazines, the environments suggest a very dark tone and atmosphere. Unlike most other survival horror games at the time, Fakedown reportedly had a combat system similar to what one would see in the beat-em-up genre. The game also had RPG elements. When Daon defeats enemies, not only does he gain their DNA, but he also gains experience points. As the game progresses, Daon gains and is able to switch between 3 different physical forms, each form fighting according to different strategies, and making use of different fighting styles. With claims of such an in-depth combat system in place for the game, along with the RPG elements, I have to wonder if survival horror would be an accurate genre to describe this game. Many survival horror games from this time intentionally limited the combat options of the player characters in order to enhance the fear that the player would experience. And even today, the providing of large amounts of combat options within a survival horror game still encourages gamers to insist that they are playing an action game rather than a horror game. Could Fakedown have been similar to games such as Hard Edge, Deep Freeze, or Onimusha? Though such games did have some scary moments and unsettling atmosphere here and there, much of the focus of said games consisted of the player character working their way through various action set pieces and scenarios. It's just that said set pieces and scenarios were placed within a fixed camera environment, according to fixed camera controls. It's telling that even the words action-adventure are prominently displayed next to Fakedown's title. Unfortunately, a ROM for Fakedown has not yet been discovered and released to the internet, and so the limited information and footage of the game left behind offers intriguing questions and insights. Who is Kira? Could she be the last killer that was sent to the moon? Her name, Kira, certainly sounds suspicious. Did the last killer somehow survive that explosion? What role does Obas play? A partner character? An eventual enemy? And who is this? What role do they play? Supposedly, motion capture was used to record the movements of the characters for the game. Yet, in the released footage, the movements are clunky enough that they look like they were manually designed. In the footage, there is also not much traction for the walk cycles of the characters. Since this is early footage, it could be that the motion capture wasn't implemented yet, and that the animations displayed are just placeholders. If that's the case, that would mean the only footage that is available comes from a very early build of the game. Strangely enough, with each preceding article on Fakedown, the listed percentage for the completion of the game's production fluctuates. With the last dated magazine article listing the game at 50% completion, the lowest percentage claim, there are still a lot of milestones we can look at to paint a picture of what the game could have been like at its most complete beta stage. Taking both the magazine articles and the small amount of released footage into account, what we have is evidence of completed CG FMV cutscenes, some completed music, at least 16 or 17 completed rooms and areas, menus and RPG mechanics, and at the very least, a rudimentary combat system and possibly ironed out environmental traction for character models when they move. It could be that the only completed fighting animations for our protagonist are the hook punches, the front kick, the jumping technique, and the claimed dodging mechanics seen in the footage and magazine photos. But it could also be that much of the progress for the game's fighting system just never made it into video or photo format, and that there's many more techniques at our protagonist's disposal. Considering the strangely decreasing values of the game's completion given to Sega Saturn magazine, as well as only a drip feed of information being provided to other magazines, even with later claims of the game's near readiness for release, it's clear that Fakedown had a troubled production. Sure enough, the game was eventually cancelled, the final nail in the coffin, supposedly being persistent issues with maintaining proper frame rate on the Sega Saturn console. Galarians was released for the PS1 in 1999, and like Fakedown, employed a manga artist, Sho Tajima, to do character drawings and concept art for the game's world. While it is true that manga illustrators of varying popularity have been brought on as creative staff for video games, both before and after the production of Fakedown, Galarians shares many other similarities. Both games are essentially about a brooding, child protagonist fighting against mutant creatures in a futuristic setting. Just as Daon makes use of 3 different forms and fighting styles to fight his enemies, Rion Steiner makes use of 3 different psychic powers for his attacks. In some ways, Galarians seems almost like a successor to Fakedown, and I have to wonder if the 2 games shared any development staff. As a big fan of the Galarians franchise, Fakedown would most likely be right up my alley, if I had an opportunity to play it. Maybe one day, more information will come out about the game that will answer what questions remain. Maybe even a playable beta of the game. We can only hope. Many thanks to Retrocore Yakumo and the Sega Gaga forums for the information they found on the game and its production. All that I learned about the game came from an archive of the Sega Gaga forum posts relating to the game, as well as translations of 3 articles from Sega Saturn magazine, which covered the game throughout its development cycle. Special thanks to Charles Norwood for providing those translations. If I had not gone to the Japanese language channel of Tara Devlin's Discord for help, much of this video would not have been possible. Thanks so much.